You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions, ep090. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Thanks for beaming aboard the 90th regular series episode of the Tricorder Transmissions. Tonight, we will be checking out Gold Key Comics issue number 10, Sceptre of the Sun. No, you're not hearing that wrong. It is Sceptre of the Sun, not Spectre of the Gun. And once again, as always, we are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett.
And Craig Cohen. And Jeff, before we get anywhere, I just want to say, I think this is the first cover that I love.
It's a great cover. And I think it's the first Gold Key cover that's not just a screen grabber or a promotional photo.
Yep.
So very awesome. And I got a big kick out of the fact that this title of this comic is so close to Spectre of the Gun. In fact, it's hard for me not to read it as Spectre of the Gun.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that, based on what we ran into last issue and some of the stuff I saw in this issue, I definitely think that the creative team, at least on the writing end, was watching the show and aware of the show at this point.
Completely agree with you, and we will get much deeper into this as we talk through the comic. Before we do that, Craig, I have to ask you, what is your thought on 90 episodes? I know it's not 100, and this is 90, just counting our regular Sunday series episodes, not our supplementals, not the What Are Little Songs Made Of, not a Tavacron. This is just our regular old, every week, every Sunday we post an episode. So 90, big round number.
It's amazing, and it's a great achievement. I think especially if people listening knows what goes into producing a podcast and just finding time that works for everybody involved. And of course, with us, it's just two people, but also dealing now with the time difference that we have, with me on the West Coast and you back there on the East Coast. And out of all the podcasts I've been involved with, this is now officially my longest running podcast. And I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished. And I'm continually proud of what we are producing week in and week out.
Wow. Well put. I can't believe this is more than Camel Clutch Cinema. I know you did that for a long time.
Yeah. I think Camel Clutch Cinema, we finished up, or at least went on our hiatus around 83 or 84 episodes. So that was 70 some odd weeks straight without a break, which is still to me an incredible achievement. I know on this one we've taken a break here and there, but we went well over a year, I believe. I think almost a year and a half without actually missing a Wednesday. I think we posted on Wednesdays.
That's very, very commendable.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, just referencing back to you mentioning all the work that goes into creating a podcast, that's more than just kind of sitting down and shooting the breeze. There's a lot of research that goes into these things. And, Camel Clutch, you guys had to sit down and watch entire movies and take notes and write up what you were going to say and your thoughts and ideas and actually execute on it, not to mention editing and producing. So there's a heck of a lot that goes into these. And, I'm completely with you on the pride that has that's come out of what we've done here. And, of course, your other work that you've done outside of this podcast.
Yeah, right on it. And I got to say that I'm continually humbled and amazed at the responses we get on social media. I know on our last episode, we had some really nice comments from Richard Jenkins.
Yes. Yeah, we've had some very consistent listeners who've been giving us feedback pretty consistently through the course of our entire run. And, we really appreciate all you regular listeners who constantly chime in and talk to us about what we're talking about on this show. It really validates us and makes us feel like what we're doing is resonating with somebody. So thanks again. And we look forward to continuing to talk to all of you as we move on and on and on. And, not to toot our own horns, but if you go all total of all of our different series in the Tricorder Transmissions, we're a little over 140 episodes in total. So that includes all of our other sub-series.
Amazing.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, who would have thought? We've been doing this a little over 2 years. So
yeah.
All right, enough putting ourselves over. Now let's get back to, I almost said Spectre of the Gun, Sceptre of the Sun. Writer is Len Wein, so not Dick Wood. Artist, though, is still Alberto Giolitti, so we still have the same artist but different writer, which explains the differences in the last couple of issues that we've been reading, the last one and this one. Star date on this is 1248.6. This issue was published on May of 1971. The cover price was 15 cents yet again. So the price hasn't gone up again. It was originally 12. We hit 15, and I'm waiting for the next price hike as these are getting better and better.
Yeah. By the way, Len Wein is co-creator of Wolverine.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good catch.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty incredible. It's pretty significant, too. There's an X-Men and Star Trek tie-in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's foreshadowing of the next crossover. They're doing Green Lantern now and Star Trek, so maybe they'll move into Marvel next and hit up the X-Men. That would be a little bit of a weird combo, though, Wolverine and Captain Kirk.
He also co-created Swamp Thing, which is kind of neat.
Oh, I was a big Swamp Thing fan when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a Troma movie, right?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think it had a little bit more of a budget behind it than Troma normally works with. I think you're thinking of the Toxic Avenger.
Oh yeah, good call. Sorry about that, everybody. That was pretty dumb. That's a face palm. I'm not going to edit that out, though. I'm just going to slap myself in the forehead if you can hear this.
New Jersey's own the Toxic Avenger.
Yes, Jersey's pride. But yeah, I was a huge Swamp Thing fan when I was a kid. It was another one of those HBO staple movies.
Yeah. That was one of Wes Craven's lesser known works, recently passed away and known, for probably Nightmare on Elm Street or the Scream franchise, or if you're a fan of movies from the 70s, The Hills Have Eyes or the Last House on the Left. But Swamp Thing was one of his.
Wow, thanks for pointing that out and make me look even worse that I didn't immediately say it was a Wes Craven film, but wow, I feel terrible now. So the cover of this, as you alluded to, the cover of this issue depicts the Enterprise, which is strangely colored gold, not its normal gunmetal gray, being grabbed by a giant genie with a sword hanging from his waist, floating in space. And in the background, it looks like there's kind of a Saturn-ish planet with a ring around it. And there's also some black and white headshots of Kirk and Spock kind of in the upper right-hand corner of this. So we're not completely without the promotional photos, but they're in a much more minor role on this cover than in previous covers. Yeah, and this really has the feel of a late 50s or an early 60s, sci-fi paperback. Big time. That's a great way. That's a great point out. I didn't make that connection until now. It really does look like some of the old books. I have some old Isaac Asimov books laying around here, and the covers are very reminiscent of this. Inside, if you flip the cover open, there's a splash page in the beginning here that acts as a teaser, as many of the comics prior to this, and it shows the away team, a 4-man away team, fighting giant stone gladiators. And McCoy is exclaiming that the phasers are having no effect on these giant rock monsters. And Kirk says that if they don't stop the rock giants, the Enterprise is doomed. There's also a text box in the upper right-hand corner explaining a little bit about what's going on to give you a bit of a teaser. I'll go ahead and read that now. It says, sorcery, black magic, mystic forces from long time dead. What will happen when James T. Kirk and the crew of the ultra-scientific Starship Enterprise come to grips with these forces, while the fate of the Enterprise and an entire planet hang in the balance? So are you ready to get into the Sceptre of the Sun? I keep having to stop and think about that title because I keep wanting to say the show title from the third season of TOS. Yeah, let's go for it. All right. So, as always, with these comic episodes, we're going to give you all a chance to pause here and go and read the comic if you don't want to hear any spoilers, because we're going to talk about the content of this issue in detail, starting in 3, 2, 1. All right, so the Enterprise, once again, is flying through space, proceeding through Sector Vega toward a rendezvous with Space Ambassador Mason at the famous Starbase 10. So we get a reference to Starbase 10. Mr. Sulu detects a nebulous mass that is approaching the ship, which is kind of in the form of a cloud. They're not exactly sure what it is for a panel or two here. And the cloud winds up taking the form of a huge man who's wearing some sort of Arabian Aladdin-esque clothing. It grabs a hold of the Enterprise in much the same way as Apollo's green hand grabbed the hold of the ship in the first season of Trek. And Sulu exclaims, "It's a genie. We've been caught by an honest-to-space genie." Of course, that seems very impossible, but of course it's happening. And Mr. Spock jumps on the sensors and finds that it doesn't indicate that there's anything out there, and he concludes that it must be some sort of an illusion. Suddenly, a mist arises on the bridge, and Captain Kirk, Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott, funny that McCoy and Scotty were on the bridge, all disappear. So very much like the TV show when people just vanish off the bridge. So the four guys materialize in a throne room inside of a castle, and they're welcomed by a bald man wearing some purple robes who introduces himself as Chang. And don't get too excited about Chang. It's not the one you think. And he tells the Enterprise crew that he has brought them there via the powers of sorcery. Scotty approaches the man and attempts to take him down. Chang uses his powers to immobilize Scotty and then proceeds to tell Kirk the reason why he has summoned them to the planet. But we are going to pause before we reveal the reasons and talk about some of the things that happened in this first part of this issue. So, Craig, another captain's log without the floating book.
Yeah, I guess they retired that technique.
Yeah, it was kind of cute though. I sort of miss it in a way.
Yeah, that happens.
All right. Well, we still don't see a full-on bridge. We kind of still see another kind of half bridge. You see something that looks kind of like the back of the bridge behind Sulu, but in the front, in the foreground, again, we have some weird machinery apparatus that doesn't fit the bridge that we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And, question for you. What exactly is a space ambassador?
That's a good question.
Don't ambassadors usually hail from somewhere?
Yeah.
You know, the Vulcan ambassador, the Romulan ambassador. This is just the space ambassador. This is a generalized space ambassador. If you need an ambassador, but you don't want him to come from anywhere specific, you just need an ambassador, you call the space ambassador Mason.
Yeah, or I think that guy got he lined up a gig for himself that nobody realizes what he's doing.
There you go. He's kind of like the state police. He just covers the entire universe.
Yeah.
All of space.
I do want to note that, again, we have another foreign being who's bald.
Yes, another bald white guy villain. So that seems to be a recurring theme. And we've had a writer change, but we have the same artist. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was just an artistic choice that they retained that sort of I'm wondering if this was still one of those cases where the writer wrote the comic, in his own way and didn't really put in any sort of direction as to what the characters should look like, and just handed the script to the artist, and the artist drew whatever he had in his mind, the vision.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Yeah. But I got to say that so far, with the exception of the opening teaser, for lack of a better word, on that first page, that right now, so far, the setup of this issue is really in line with something that we'd see on the original series.
I agree with you completely. I was going to mention the same thing. This really does feel a lot more like an episode of the show. And in fact, in page 3, the last panel, when the space genie grabs a hold of the ship, there's a depiction of the bridge crew being shaken about which is pretty much the comic adaptation of the famous camera shake or
Yes.
camera tilt that was Star Trek is so famous for, the original series anyway. Actually, I think they did that on almost every series, but the original series is the one they really hammed it up the most.
Oh, yeah.
So I love that was incorporated in. It really feels like they're hearkening back to the television show there. So sadly, as I mentioned before, we have a villain named Chang, and it is not the Klingon Chang from Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. So I'm sad to see that name reused. Well, actually, I guess it was reused in the movie since this comic came out many, many years prior. But I was kind of sad to see that they used the name Chang.
Yeah, and what? It's not the first name that's been the same.
No, it's not. So we've had some similar names, and I guess maybe this is just plain old coincidence, I imagine. Yep. I'm kind of sad. But, Scotty's hair is still the wrong color. It's not blonde anymore. It's brown now, but it's still not black.
Yeah, and he's still got the same terrible accent.
Oh, yeah. You know what? And I'm starting to wonder if that is just trying to write out a Scottish accent, and it's just very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to translate well into poorly spelled words. So I guess I can't fault them for trying, but just a hard thing to pull off. So anything else to say about this first section of the comic before we move on?
No, but I'm on board. Like I said, I really like the setup of this issue.
Me too. So Chang is telling them that at the foot of a mountain many miles away from his castle lives a device called the Sceptre of the Sun. This is a magical staff or scepter that he can wield that will give him powers that are unmatched anywhere in the universe. That's a direct quote. He wishes to use the power of the scepter to counteract the spell that he says is being cast by a rival sorcerer named Xandu. So there are apparently two kingdoms on this planet, one ruled by Chang and the other ruled by another sorcerer named Xandu. And Xandu has materialized a gigantic flaming scimitar over Chang's city just to keep Chang from making any hostile moves. So Chang and his people in the city are allowed to live in peace. As long as they don't do anything hostile, the flaming sword will just remain hovering above the planet's surface and will not actually kill anybody. But Chang wants to fight back and destroy the sword, so he has kidnapped the landing party from the Enterprise and wants to send them off to grab this mystical Sceptre of the Sun. Kirk and Spock attempt to protest a little bit as they normally would, but because of Chang's immense sorcery powers, they pretty much have no choice. Even Spock questions the logic and the fact that Chang has this immense power available to him. It would make more sense for Chang to go after the scepter himself, but Chang decides he doesn't need to answer Spock and just says he has his own reasons, and instead threatens to destroy the Enterprise if they don't do as he wishes, which is very, very much like many of the villains from the TV show. So Chang introduces a female character by the name of Marla, who is going to serve as their guide into the mountains and wishes them luck. And Kirk, of course, throws out a threat as he's walking out the door that if anything happens to the Enterprise, the whole entire universe will be too small to hide Chang. So he's implying that Starfleet will hunt Chang down if anything happens to the crew members aboard the Enterprise. So the landing party sets off in search of the Sceptre of the Sun, with Marla leading them on. A little ways out, Kirk gets the feeling that something isn't right. Just as that happens, the rock walls surrounding them explode into the stone gladiators that we saw on the splash page, and the landing party finds themselves under attack by immense giant stone gladiators wielding swords and clubs. They come up with the idea as they're attempting to flee that if they run in a zigzag pattern between the giant monster's legs, that they may have a chance of getting them to hit each other, which winds up being very successful. And the two rock giants wind up crushing each other with their own weapons, narrowly escaping with their lives. It is becoming a sunset, nighttime, and the crew decides to set up camp for the night. Kirk and Marla begin to talk about Chang and the source of his powers, and Marla reveals that they don't really know how he got his powers, but he set off into the mountains in the north, and when he came back, Chang had changed and had these twisted magical powers available to him and wound up bending everybody to his will. And just as they're talking about that, the camp is attacked by a band of primitive-looking men carrying swords and clubs. So, unfortunately, there are so many of them. Kirk and the landing party are overpowered, and Kirk is grabbed and taken captive and threatened with death unless the others surrender. So we will stop here. A lot has happened, so we will talk a little bit about this second part of the comic. And one thing I really like about this is more consistency with the show. McCoy has a bit of an outburst at Chang earlier on and mentions the fact that there's 400 people on board the Enterprise. So it's kind of close to the 430 crewmen we've always heard Kirk talk about.
Yes.
So really cool that the writer seems to be a little more in tune with some of the lore from the television show here, down to these details.
Yeah, it almost seems like maybe they're working from the series Bible or something.
Yeah, there was a Star Trek writer's guide that was issued, and I have a PDF copy of it. It's very fascinating to read. I'm sure it's common knowledge to most of the listeners out there, but if you haven't heard of it, there was a writer's guide that was available, not at the beginning, but a little bit into the series proper that writers could use to reference points like this, so they didn't have all these kind of outlandish made-up things that didn't fit the show.
Yeah, you know what? We should maybe even devote a supplemental to a discussion of that guide.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea, Craig. I think we should definitely do that. We'll look into that.
But the one thing that this section of the comic really, it's funny because it has moments that really feel like the show, and then it's got the moments where they're hitting the standard comic book notes. It was interesting to see that. And also the introduction of the Marla character for me is really, really confusing because there's really no payoff with her. And I think it was more just a way to work a female into the comic because Kirk seemed to always hook up.
That is something that I had written down to talk about too. When I saw the Marla character introduced, my brain automatically went, uh-oh, do we have Kirk's first female victim of the comic series here? I fully expected Kirk to hook up with her at some point. In fact, as they're talking around the fire, there is let me see here, where exactly in the comic is it? I think it is, page 10, panel 4, there's a picture of Kirk protecting her. He's kind of like holding on to her as the rock monsters are forming. And then page 13, panel 4 has a headshot, essentially, of Marla talking to Kirk, and she's looking quite seductive, the way they drew her, the artist drew her. So I really, really was convinced that this was going to be Kirk's first hookup of the comic series. Didn't turn out that way yet, though. Might still turn out, but didn't turn out that way yet.
Nope.
Trying to ruin this plot a little bit here. I'm gonna throw one of those moments at you that I really don't understand why they couldn't have done this. Wouldn't it have made more sense for Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Scotty to beam back to the Enterprise and then just beam exactly where the scepter was?
Yeah.
Why did they have to go on this long trek and go through all these trials when, I mean, Marla knew exactly where it was going to lead them right to it? Wouldn't it have made more sense to just use the technology available?
Yeah, and especially considering that later in the issue we see that the Enterprise is pretty much able to do everything it normally does, except it's stuck in space.
Exactly. It's just stuck in a tractor beam, but it has the ability to fire the phasers and beam people up and down. So, it would have been much easier. I guess it would have ruined the story completely. Or, they probably could have just beamed the scepter itself up.
Yeah, they would have saved a lot of trouble, and
yeah.
We'd be done talking already.
Yeah, would have been on to other things. But page 11 finds our inside cover teaser image kind of almost duplicated, but with the Marla character added in the foreground.
Right.
So it didn't take long in the comic to get to that teaser portion.
Yeah, I think it was just one of those things where, with the comics, we have to expect that every issue has to start with an action beat to grab the reader's attention, I guess.
Yeah, it was the equivalent of the pre-credit roll portion of every episode of TOS.
Yep.
So they kind of were following the same beat as the television show. And this sequence struck me with the rock monsters as something they probably could not have pulled off on the television show with giant rock people. Maybe with similar sized, human-sized rock people, but not with, 20-foot tall giants.
Yeah, no, this is the point where we hit a little bit of a disconnect between the show and the comic book in terms of what it could do. But it made me think of the rock monsters we see in the movie series.
Yeah, good call. That's great. Yeah, definitely. So it kind of is one of those things where if the technology had been available like it was later on, they could easily do it. But back in the 60s when the budget was limited and you could only produce things like the rock monster from the Savage Curtain, that wasn't quite feasible. I mean, maybe if the budgets were really big, they could have done some forced perspective stuff and made, the rock monsters look maybe potentially convincing.
Yeah.
But probably not to the degree that they would have needed to make it realistic.
Yeah.
So anything to add about part 2 here before we move on?
Nope.
So the leader of the men who are attacking the landing party introduces himself as Brand. They immediately apologize for the violence and claim that they had no time for formalities. But something tells me if they would have just walked up and said, "Hi, how's it going?" it wouldn't have been a big deal. But Brand tells them that he also needs help, just as Chang claimed he needs help. And Brand and his followers are Chang's enemies. They came from the same place, but they became enemies once they reached this planet. And it is revealed that they came from Earth, but not your Earth, meaning the Earth of the Enterprise crew. We come from the year 1997, so Earth of the past. And this is the part of the comic that kind of made my jaw drop. Yeah. They mentioned the Great Eugenics War was raging across the face of the world at the time, and we were part of a small peace movement that tried to stem the destructive tide. So finally, when they decided they were defeated and couldn't continue, they built a spaceship and fled Earth in search of a peaceful world. So for many years, they drifted in space and suspended animation until they sensed this planet, a quiet, peaceful world, still in a state of industrial infancy. And upon reviving from their stasis, they landed in a secluded place and began to dismantle their rocket and use the technology for other things, knowing that they were going to stay on this world for the rest of their lives. They found it very easy to assimilate into the simple culture that existed on the planet, and they considered life there perfect, all that they could possibly hope for, except for one renegade named Chang. So Brand goes on to tell them how Chang felt that he had gotten bored and decided that he was going to set off and explore the planet and find different and new things to experience on this world. And he took off, and with that, they continued to live for quite a while until Chang reemerged from his trip into the great beyond. He came back on a giant throne being carried by slaves and somehow had these new telekinetic powers which he could use to force everyone living in the village to do his bidding. So Brand tells Kirk that fortunately, they've got a spy in Chang's guards, and he had learned through that spy that Kirk and company were sent to find the scepter, and now he and his men wish to come along and find the scepter and use it for themselves in hope of liberating their world from Chang's grasp. Kirk, of course, knows that they're outnumbered by Brand's men and decides that they have no choice but to allow them to come along on the journey. So they set off on miles and miles and miles of trekking until they come across a small temple, and in that temple is the Scepter of the Sun. Once again, we're at a stopping point. So, obviously, I'm going to throw this out there right off the bat and point out the fact that this is an obvious Space Seed tie-in.
Yeah.
So we've got the eugenics wars. We've got the wrong year. It's 1 year later than Khan reference. He was 1996, right?
I believe so, yeah.
I believe Khan was 1996. So this was 1997. And they don't come outright and say that these people are augments or any relation to Khan or the genetically engineered superhumans from Space Seed, but I was scratching my head wondering if maybe these were meant to be the peaceful opposition of the contingent of super beings that didn't want to enslave humanity. What did you think, Craig?
Yeah, no, I think me and you are along the same thought pattern here.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. I love they don't come out right out and say it. They kind of leave it a bit of a mystery, and they don't really get into it any more than what we've already read. But it's interesting that on page 16, panel 3, you see a shot of these people's ship, and it doesn't look anything like the Botany Bay.
No.
Not at all. So it was clearly a different group of people who built a completely different ship than the Botany Bay, but it was entirely the same mechanic. So they were in a form of stasis or cryogenic freeze in search of a new habitable planet. So it was pretty much a complete duplicate of the Khan and his crew theme from the Space Seed episode.
Right.
So obviously they had access to that, and I guess I guess they really wanted to create a parallel story here.
Oh yeah, totally, and that was really, I think you already said it, a jaw-dropping moment in the comic. When we hit it, I actually, turned the page and went back and read it again because I was like, whoa, it's not something you expect in the comics.
No, especially after the last 9 issues that we read that seemed almost, for the most part, completely disconnected from anything that happened on the show, with the exception of a couple of characters and the ship.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. Now, my hopes for the future of Gold Key have gone up exponentially after reading this one.
Same here. Although then we get into the standard comic book cliche of having the person that seems like an ally at the beginning of the episode being our ultimate villain.
Of course. They did that on the show a few times too, but yeah, it does seem like that's an overused trope in the Gold Key comics. It always seems like somebody who's our buddy at the beginning winds up being the big bad guy at the end. So, anything else to add before we move on?
Nope.
All right. So, as they are approaching the Scepter of the Sun, a gigantic robot comes out of nowhere and begins to attack them. So, this is the 3rd time they've been attacked on the journey. Kirk grabs the scepter and tries to use it against the robot, but it doesn't really do anything at all. So, the scepter appears useless. Spock tells Kirk to distract the robot while he carries out a plan that he's just thought of. And Kirk starts to shout things at the robot, some taunts, like, your mother wore an asteroid wig, and your father flew a space scow.
Yeah.
That's added by Scotty. The robot apparently is susceptible to taunting and is distracted. So Spock is climbing up a pillar nearby, a rock pillar, climbs out on a ledge and jumps onto the robot's back, rips open a panel on the back of the robot, starts ripping out some wires, and the robot comes crashing to the ground. So Spock was able to disable the robot by tearing out some of its internal wiring. Kirk asks Spock why the scepter didn't work when he tried to use it, and Spock seems to have an understanding of what's really going on here. And he comes to the conclusion that the scepter is not exactly magical, and nor are Chang's powers, but they need to get back to the castle and confront Chang along with Brand and his people. Mm-hmm. So they journey back. They find Chang at the controls of a giant computer, which It seems strange that he would need a computer with all his magic powers. Brand rushes towards Chang to attack him, and Chang turns him into a large toad. So Chang starts to explain to Kirk that the machine that he has there is pulling the Enterprise down to the planet, and he plans to use the resources of the Enterprise to take control of the universe itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got yet another villain hell-bent on getting a hold of the Enterprise. And this is funny because it seems like his initial goal was just to get a hold of the Scepter and free his city, or maybe even conquer the entire planet. But now his ambitions have broadened, and he's after the entire universe. So it's a huge jump, Craig.
Yeah, I think though it was all just a distraction. I think his end, the end result for him was always taking over the Enterprise. So I think this was just, sort of the smoke and mirrors a magician uses to distract the person watching the trick.
Good call. That seems completely logical.
Yeah.
To me. So Spock, I thought this was kind of funny. There's a panel where Spock has injured the robot enough to disable it, and the robot is having a little electrical static discharge, and Spock is jumping off the robot's back, and in midair, Spock is praising his own ingenuity while he's jumping or attempting to jump to safety. I thought it was a strange moment for Spock to decide to pat himself on the back.
Yeah, I think that was a case of the artist just needing to cram a lot of action into a specific page.
Yeah, good call. Probably not something that would have happened on screen. I can't see a camera tightening into Spock's face as he's flying through the air and having him talking about what he just did.
I love it.
Yeah. So, yeah, that another thing I just mentioned actually while we were listening to this commentary, but I thought that it was funny that Chang has a giant computer. I maybe that's one of the things that finally gives Spock the final thumbs up that Chang may not be all he's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
That he needs a computer to do what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But Spock, did you notice that Spock seems much more concerned with logic in this issue than prior ones?
Yeah, and I think, again, that's just more, the writer being a little bit more in tune with the series and its characters.
Yeah, definitely. So I love the fact that Spock is even more Spock-like in this issue than in prior ones. So
yep.
As with the last issue or so, we're getting even closer and closer and closer to what we remember from the show itself. So, Craig, anything else to add before we move on?
No, let's power through and finish this sucker.
All right, so this is the finale. So Spock attempts to take Chang down. Chang uses his powers to create a strange-looking gorilla-ish alien thing. So it almost looks like a gorilla in body form, but its face is not quite gorilla-like. So Spock is completely unfazed by the appearance of this giant gorilla and walks completely through it. So much to the astonishment of the rest of the landing party and Brand's people, Spock has just completely walked through the ape creature. And Spock says that everything is an illusion and Chang's powers are a sham and it's all in their mind, so that the magic that they thought they had seen is completely illusionary. So this is something that we've seen on the show as well. So Chang knows the ruse is up and orders his guards to attack the party. And in the confusion, he winds up escaping. Kirk makes his way to follow Chang up to the top of a nearby tower. The two struggle, and Chang winds up being able to disarm Kirk and knock his phaser out of his hand. But, as luck would have it, as Chang is about to kill Captain Kirk, a bolt of lightning strikes the sword that he's got in his hand and electrocutes him to death. So Kirk and Spock examine Chang's tractor beam and trying to find a way to shut it off, but they can't do it. So Kirk calls up to the Enterprise and orders a full phaser power blast at the palace in 90 seconds, giving the landing party just enough time to escape along with Brand's people. The palace winds up being destroyed, and the tractor beam releases the Enterprise. So the crew is able to beam back and get out of there just in time.
Yeah,
So,
that is another moment that really felt like a series moment to me.
oh, it totally did. And another series moment for me is they wind up discussing the aftermath between the three of them, and McCoy is talking about Brand gets his peaceful planet back, and hoping that there are no other Changs waiting around. And Spock chimes in saying if he only had the patience to wait, he could have conquered all the galaxies. And Kirk says, Chang's secret died with him. And for all our sakes, I hope they stay that way. So they wrap up this issue again with another conference between the Trinity characters. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's going to become a staple of the Gold Key comics now.
I really hope so, because it really makes it all that much closer to the show that we love. Yeah. So no Uhura and no Chekhov in this issue.
No.
And I guess in a minor, no Nurse Chapel either. So I don't think we've even seen Nurse Chapel yet in the comic.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so Uhura was in the last issue, but doesn't make her way into this issue. So I guess they're picking and choosing. But did Chang's death by being struck by lightning strike you as a little too lucky or opportunistic?
Surprisingly, no. For me, it was just more taking note of a character death, which we didn't really see that often, throughout the series and in the comic book so far.
No, that's true. Yeah, I don't think we've seen that before. No, that's a good call. I just thought it was one of those situations where Kirk just lucked out and cheated death just by complete sheer random chance.
Yeah, now that you mention it, that is, a little bit of a coincidence. But I guess I was so invested in the story that I was suspending my disbelief.
Ah, well, I applaud you for that, and I should have done the same myself. But did you notice that on page 25, panel 3, Kirk is communicating with the Enterprise using a tricorder?
Oh, wow, yes.
Not a communicator. So he's validating the name of our podcast. He's transmitting via a tricorder.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a tricorder transmission. Very cool. Let's see. Oh, there's a bridge-like area that we see Sulu in. So the background behind Sulu as they're communicating looks an awful lot like the bridge. So another nod to the show there. This is a line of dialogue that struck me as odd. Now, I don't know who exactly is saying it. It's hard to tell if it's Kirk or McCoy, but there's a moment where the Enterprise is shooting the phasers on the castle, and one of the two of them says, or Spock makes some sort of a statement, and one of the two of them says, "Why don't you save your breath for praying, Spock?" That really struck me as odd.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there were a couple of lines of dialogue in this issue where I had to go back and read them, and I realized that I misread them. But this was one that definitely seemed odd and way out of character.
Yeah, in a show that makes a point not to mention religion, it just seemed a little strange that they used the word praying in there, and even in such a context that he's kind of telling Spock to shut up.
Yeah.
And save his breath and pray instead. So I guess probably just a writer's choice. Nothing to get too upset over, but there's something that stuck out to me. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up, except for the question, I guess, when we talked about this a bit earlier. We still don't know if Chang and Brand and their people were meant to be augments the same way that Khan and his people were, or were they regular humans? And they don't seem to possess the physical strength of the augments, so that kind of made me question whether or not they were.
Yeah.
I want to believe that they were, and it makes sense that they would be, especially since they mentioned the eugenics wars. Humanity won the eugenics war, so it doesn't make sense for them to have left the planet if they were humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they really were. So I'm going to pose that question to our a very responsive audience out there, and let us know what you think. Do you think that this second ship full of people who left during the eugenics wars, left Earth, are actually meant to be augments, or are they actually regular, just normal old human beings? So we'd love to talk about it with you guys.
Oh, yeah.
So, Craig, a non-canon essential vote. I am going to throw a non-canon essential at this one just because of the staggering tie-in to an existing TOS episode.
Yeah, same here. I think that there is a little bit of a continuity flow between the series and the comic book going on, but also an attempt to at least establish its own continuity as well. So I just have to say that this is an essential reading in terms of the Gold Key comics.
Excellent. So we agree yet again. This is great. And I will reiterate again that I am super excited to keep reading these Gold Keys now that we've gotten this humongous tie-in. I have a good feeling that we'll be seeing more cool stuff like this in our future. And I'm excited because it's stuff that we haven't read before.
And it's also neat because it's kind of like, with TV shows, they say, oh, you have to give certain TV shows a couple of episodes for them to really hit their stride. And It's funny that we're now, 10 issues into the comic, and it seems like they're possibly hitting their stride as well.
Oh, great observation. Definitely seems that way. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that issue 11 will be just as good. And I will confess to the audience that we don't read these issues ahead of time. So we read them for the first time to record this. So our reactions are actually our real reactions to these.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right, Craig, anything else to add before we close up shop?
No, not at all. Just again, I'm excited and anxious to move forward and talk to you on episode 91.
All right. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the Tricorder Transmissions, and we're really happy you're along for the ride. Catch up with us on social media at facebook.com/the Tricorder Transmissions, Twitter at TTT_pod, and of course our own website, the tricordertransmissions.com. We look forward to seeing you again next week.